This video contains flashing lights, unsettling content and violent content. It is also not suitable for viewers who suffer from a body mygophobia, acrophobia, aerophobia, astrophobia, netophobia and thalassophobia. Viewer discretion advised.
They are the ground beneath our feet, the clouds in the sky, and the water all around. Every game has its themes, and with them comes a pattern of recognizable environments and areas to traverse through.
Some may act as a one-off level to make our way from one end to the next along some grand journey, or they may be a series of individual locations within an overworld where important quests and side stories take place.
Get ready as we take a portal through the top 85 common levels in games.
Darkness. Mostly an example of poor level design choices, the dark levels are an attempt to ramp up the scare factor, or add an interesting twist to a regular platforming stage. More often or not, the player will need some special item to help them navigate this level. Action platformers use these levels often to test the player's patience and memory. Enemies will be placed in hidden areas or near pits. Sometimes generators will be placed around the environment to light up pathways for a few seconds. Action, adventure, and horror games focus on the player navigating areas in pitch-black darkness, with the only light source being a lantern, flashlight, or torch. Depending on the game, however, the biggest threat may simply be not knowing when the next enemy will pop up unexpectedly. Toy shop, kids room. Due to the player touching some cursed artifact, or they suddenly awake to find themselves in a miniature form, it's obvious they've shrunk to the size of a toy. Often found in action-adventure, action platformer games, or in rare cases, racing games, the player has to try and find a way around their surroundings, climbing their way up to the top of the room, or traversing a dollhouse, or a miniature toy train. Here, they'll encounter various enemies, such as toys that have been abandoned for quite some time, rowdy kids, store owners, security cameras, and cats or dogs who tower over the player like some giant monster from a film. Hazards may include red Legos serving as lava, or ball pits as treacherous water. These levels tend to let the player get creative, with having to climb up shelves with various contraptions, or catapulting themselves across the room with another toy. Expect tons of amazing set pieces, especially if one manages to get onto a high vantage point, making one feel like a giant in this wondrous terrain.
Movie set. Often associated with Hollywood productions, a movie set is a place where movie magic is created, comprising a multitude of genres, many of which are found on this list. From a down-to-earth story to a fantastic adventure beyond the furthest stars, all is possible in a movie set with the right tools and imagination. In action platformers and action-adventure games, a movie set will often comprise a vast selection of props and backdrops from many genres, various costumes, and a variety of audio and camera equipment. When wandering such a level, any manner of adversaries and challenges can be confronted, such as actors in costumes, inanimate objects, or security guards. Some missions may even get the player to assassinate key targets at the movie set, or even participate in a short movie for an NPC.
Zoo. Being the center of a variety of animal life, a zoo will often be categorized by the presence of different environmental themes to cater to the wildlife they have in captivity, from the wild plains to the snowy peaks to the swamps and jungles, not to mention a huge variety of animals held in confinement. Perhaps the player may even get an opportunity to secure a cute toy from the gift shop on their way out. If they're unlucky, they may be faced with the wildlife themselves who don't take too kindly to being locked up for so long and relish an opportunity for freedom. Much can be learned from the zoo, but there's also much to be wary of when the zoo goes wrong. Animal life can be hard to predict when they regain their freedom in an unfamiliar land. JRPGs have these levels as a backdrop or meeting place between characters. Action-adventure games have zoos as a set piece for beat-em-ups, with the animals serving as hazards to both the player and enemies. In some cases, they may want the player to eliminate key targets from within its boundaries without alerting the public. Horror games, while quite rare, feature the area as abandoned or teeming with mutant animals.
Viking. In action-adventure and first-person shooters, technology and weaponry will be limited, with broadswords, axes, and bow and arrows being the standard affair. Transport of choice will typically be a longboat or horseback, but that's really all one needs to make a name for themselves. Enemies will appear in the form of warring factions, wild animals like wolves and bears, and, if the game has a more mystical side to it, mythological beasts. Pastimes can indulge in longboats, duking it out on the waves, conducting raids on enemy encampments, going hunting, or simply getting blackout drunk in drinking contests alongside fellow revelers. In sandbox games, it's always best to be kept well stocked on useful items if traveling far from home. Friendly faces are likely to be few and far between, so there's no telling when, or even if, another village will be found when trouble could be anywhere in this scenic world.
Dream. The world of dreams is one of the few places where anything is possible, and the realms of reality are shattered to create whatever the imagination could come up with. Though this may not always result in something wholesome and pleasant, as the land of dreams can also be the realm of nightmares where all manner of horrors can exist in every form. Dreams will often be categorized as being outlandish enough to supersede what is possible in the real world. Breaking the laws of reality and perhaps creating scenarios with secret hidden meanings that only the most insightful explorers can unravel. Of course, dreams can simply be dreams, but how much is imagination and how much is reality, especially when the two overlap? Most action-adventure games or action platformers depict limitless expanses of shallow reflective water with sparse clouds, sometimes with a low-hanging white fog. Enemies may not even be present in these sections, instead be replaced with friendly NPCs. Huge entities may be present in the shape of dolphins or flying pirate ships. With everything whitewashed to create that eagerly dreamlike feeling we all come to expect from these types of levels.
Bank. Regardless of the reasons to go to the bank, chances are there's lots of money involved. Exactly what they plan to do with it, however, is not so cut and dry. It could be a simple safe haven to store their hard-earned currency whilst they explore the wide-open world, ensuring they get back on their feet in case that trip through a dungeon doesn't quite turn out exactly as planned. Action-adventure games and first-person shooter games normally task the player to be part of a crew of thieves, looking to make a very large and unauthorized withdrawal. This usually results in breaking in after strategizing a plan to empty the vault, whilst fending off angry SWAT teams storming the place. Sometimes the roles would be switched, and the player is the officer of the law responding to such a crime. Whatever the case, they can be sure that it's a lot more enjoyable than just waiting in line to discuss finances.
Machine. A vast network of metal, electronics, gears, and pistons highlight the general environment found within the machines that games will often use for a stage. requiring precision and careful timing to navigate the maze of gears, cogs, and levers to avoid all manner of painful endings as the machine continues on its endless cycle of work. Be the machine, a production line, or something of a much more sinister design, roaming around inside such a machine is a perilous task for the intrepid explorer. Though this may provide an opportunity to dismantle such a machine from its most vulnerable place, inside itself, where even the smallest of clogs or jams can lead to a complete catastrophic failure, destroying the machine. Action-adventure games will feature the player shrunk down to enter the Doomsday Machine and dismantle it from the inside. These particular levels have been heralded as the most difficult and challenging parts of the game. Expect moving fans, platforms, gears, crushers, and conveyors. Racing games will feature this same sort of style, but with more hazardous objects on a track, as well as difficult hairpin turns and pits.
Savanna. While the sprawling dusty landscape sparsely decorated with trees and the odd waterhole are certainly beautiful to behold, don't get too distracted, as there's probably danger afoot somewhere. Exotic wildlife like elephants, giraffes, and rhinos are more potential sightseeing delights, but more deadly fare like big cats and packs of hungry hyenas can pose a threat if they're not careful. Smaller enemies such as termites, scorpions, snakes, and ants will also pose a problem to the player. Civilization will likewise be hard to find, if not impossible, but sometimes there might be a small village somewhere with locals willing to help out by trading supplies in exchange for other items acquired. In action-adventure games, the player may be placed in this location to search for a lost relic. In first-person shooters, the player will be battling poachers and mercenaries for paid work. Food Land. Perhaps the land of sweets, perhaps something with a more healthy feel. Foodlands will often take a more fantasy feel by replacing real-world concepts with food alternatives such as sweet confectionery. Houses made of wafer, candy cane streetlights, lollipop trees, chocolate-filled lakes, cookie cars, biscuit chairs, gingerbread statues, candy floss forests, toffee quarries, sugar mines, and anything the imagination can come up with, except in an edible form. In action platformer and party games, Foodland levels are more common themes. The player would traverse these marvelous worlds, defeating scores of food-themed enemies such as crazy carrots, savage sweets, deadly desserts, and powerful potatoes. Just because they look tasty does not mean they're not equally as deadly. In some areas, it's not uncommon to find giant coffee cups, burgers, ice creams, donuts, and mountains of cake and cheese, sometimes rivers full of milk or wine instead of chocolate. In racing games, these levels serve as more imaginative backdrop, where river liquids will serve as hazards if a player falls in. These levels will also be aimed towards younger players and feature less of a challenge and more of a fun experience.
Theater. Cinema. In theaters, the player would witness an onstage show, perhaps even taking part in it. Mostly consisting of opera or orchestra, it's usually during these sections that an intense battle may occur. In sandbox games, cinema levels are where the game developers spend any of their remaining animation budget and show it off for fun in a unique way. These tend to be comedic spoofs of already existing movies or beta trailers of their own game. They take creative liberties to make it humorous and unpredictable to players. However, it's not all peaceful, as there are chances of encountering enemies, like rowdy movie patrons, underpaid employees, or even movie characters coming out of the screen. If that happens though, there's a small chance that you can hop into the world of the movie, leading to unique minigames themed to different movie genres. In horror games, theaters and cinemas are abandoned and bleak, with the cinemas still playing their films on loop despite the desolation. Once bastions of entertainment, now left a dead husk of its former self.
Scrapyard. Oftentimes paired with a construction site, the Scrapyard is a staple for action-adventure games, fitting in with the grungy aesthetic of rust and machinery. Loud metallic sounds echo through the tumbling mountains of junk. The player is usually forced to dodge and traverse between cranes, car crushers, conveyor belts, and other compacting equipment. Scrapyard levels are almost always confusing to navigate, with enemies ambushing the player from impossible angles. Enemies would usually consist of henchmen, animated scrap parts, vermin such as rats and flies, rusty bots, and even heavy machinery. In some racing games, scrapyard levels can be notoriously difficult, with debris littering the track, active machinery, and difficult turns.
Gameshow. Welcome to the show, where excitement and prizes are the order of business for this theme. Expect bright lights, cheering audiences, and a charismatic and charming host to guide the player through the upcoming game, be it a talk show, question round, physical challenge, or themed show. Expect the player to have their mind tested, their body challenged, and their commitment pushed. In action-adventure games, expect these types of levels to be a deadly trap for the villain to dispose of their nemesis in an exciting death game finale. These would usually consist of knowledge questions the player has encountered through the game. Other variants could be physical assault courses. The lucky player could walk away with fabulous prizes with their glorious win, or be left with the walk of shame, or worse.
Underground mine. Found in a surprising amount of games, these mines can hold terrifying enemies and settings for any new-time player. In action platformers, the settings can be extremely dark, the only source of light being old lanterns left from previous miners. Here, the player may have to crawl through pitch-black tunnels, sometimes having to dodge falling rocks or boulders, which can hinder their path. They can also encounter various adversaries, like miners who have gone insane, trolls, goblins, bats, spiders, inanimate pickaxes, or even giant insects. There's still some fun to be had, because in some cases, a player may actually ride a minecart through the level, dodging broken sections of the tracks or defending themselves against oncoming enemies. Expect some sections to be flooded or have poisonous gas. It's not uncommon to find a stack of dynamite sticks that the player will need to detonate to reveal a new path. In most racing games, hazards are frequently encountered, with bottomless pits, dark track sections, and the occasional minecart. Expect these levels to be either challenging or annoying. In horror games, the underground mine is used to great effect, with near pitch-black abandoned tunnels, ghostly apparitions, and rusty minecarts. Wacky Land. In video games, at least, there is a definitive answer. It's a land where the laws of science don't apply, and the laws that do apply won't make a lick of sense to players. Wacky Land is the eccentric relative in the family of levels forming a game's whole. Yet, this level is still more than the salad of rainbow jello it brings to the table. Whether it's conversing with colorful characters on the ceiling or racing oddball creatures against a sparkly backdrop, every surprise is a rush of nostalgia for the kid at heart. Action platformers tend to have some insane location that's out of place from the other levels in the game. The enemies would be vastly different than the ones in the previous levels, and something that cannot make sense. Expect gravity to not exist on props, NPC characters speaking gibberish, and lots of fourth wall breaking by the developers. Action-adventure games would have these locations where the protagonist is drugged up or having a vivid drunk nightmare. Normally this plays into the character's fears, but not so much that it becomes a horror game. Much in the same way as immersing oneself deep within children's literature, doing favors for typically inanimate objects both intrigues and entertains. Ultimately, what Wacky Land accomplishes is making itself memorable, by making a player remember what it was like to create imaginative worlds just like it. Lake. Home to many forms of life, lakes have often been a place of calm where nature can flourish, providing a place to refresh and hydrate for animals, plants, and humans alike. Not to mention opportunities for fishing or swimming for the tired adventurer. Often, a lake will be a notable location for exploration, recreation, or simply a stopping point on the path to grander adventures. Action-adventure games feature the lake as the grand central piece of the level, with some of the more tricky challenges awaiting the player from below its depths. Expect enemies to consist of henchmen, birds, and water creatures. While the lake is usually incredibly expansive, don't be surprised if the game developers place collectibles under the water for the player to find. Racing games have the course set around the lake, serving the water as out of bounds, or in some cases driving through it via underground passage. Horror games feature the lake as an escape route to get from one side of the island to the other, while fending off hordes of monsters or other entities. Larger lakes can be home to something much more dangerous than the calm would lead us to believe. Not all creatures drawn to the waters are safe from those that may reside within its depths. What mysteries may be found if one dives deeper into the story of the lake? What secrets can be discovered and what horrors should be left undiscovered? The calm may conceal something far greater than one could possibly imagine or dread.
Pearly white stone cities sprawling across a lush countryside or along the length of a vibrant yellow beach. A civilization built under the rule of great and terrible gods, fearing and fighting against some of the mightiest and most frightening beasts ever to be born of this earth. These are the images that usually spring to mind when you conjure up the world of ancient Greece. So it stands to reason that such an amazing backdrop brimming with creativity and imagination would find its way to be featured in a video game. There are so many legends and fables from Greek mythology that it would be a waste not to use them. The Trojan War, the legend of Hercules, the dreaded Cerberus guarding the gates of Hades, the labyrinth of the Minotaur, and even the pantheon of gods of every kind that exists atop Mount Olympus. To this day, action-adventure games have only cracked the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what Greece has to offer, and whether it be level architecture, storyline, or even enemy design, the inspiration behind it all will live on forever.
Underground subway. Serving as the arteries of travel through a city, the subway is a network of tunnels connecting the city together via a train-like metro. Often very populated with commuters going about their lives, waiting for their railed chariots to take them on their way through the dark depths. Sandbox games feature the subways as hubs connecting one location to the other, with many other NPCs idling around, none of them wanting to board any trains. Racing games feature these types of levels where the racers will compete through the tunnels of the tracks and terminals. The hazards themselves would be the oncoming trains as well as construction sites. Horror games tend to use these levels often, serving as dark, foreboding places. These areas are usually abandoned or sometimes still open but no one is around. The trains may still be running, but there's usually a killer on the loose, or monsters lurking nearby. Expect the game developers to have invisible walls in the presence of a speeding train.
Welcome to the transit station.
Skyscraper Tower. Vast towering marvels of steel, concrete and glass that reach towards the very heavens themselves and serve as an icon of a well-developed city. Skyscrapers are often a center of commerce and business, with a multitude of offices and services for a fully enclosed structure accessed primarily through lifts and simple stairwells that form the backbone of any tower or skyscraper. Oftentimes, each floor is similar in look to each other, providing all the usual facilities for any business to run effectively and keep staff satisfied as they go about their daily lives. Of course, this does limit one's route of escape should the worst happen and a more express route is liable to be a fatal fall. Action platformers tend to use these levels as a test for players to venture their way to the very top, usually by trapezing themselves on the sides of the building or clouds to get there. Action-adventure games would require the player to enter the building from ground level and fight their way through hordes of enemies to finally reach the villain at the very top. In horror games, the entire building will be under lockdown by police, and the player would have to be sent in to investigate a paranormal presence.
Secret Base. Often located deep underground or disguised in an otherwise unremarkable location, the Secret Base is a perfect location for any villain to plan their next move out of sight of prying eyes. In action platformers, first-person shooters, and action-adventure games, the Secret Base is usually featured as the final level of the game. Players had better be prepared for a difficult time and some grisly discoveries. Unethical science experiments, war machines, chaos vehicles, or doomsday weapons, the player would have to destroy these abominations before the apocalypse kicks off. As with any final level, expect hordes of goons with varying classes, laser traps, mounted turrets, security cameras, robots, Tesla coils, and searchlights. If the villain knows they have lost the base, expect it to be fused to a timer, where the player will need to rush and find the exit before it's too late.
Farm. A location where vast fields of crops grow and cattle idle around day by day. A farm is categorized by less urban or industrial development, sporadic structures, vast fields, and an often rustic style. In simulated games, these locations can be placed to acquire or grow foods for survival or profit into greater goals and adventures. Usually a place of calm and relaxing surroundings, and a place of humble safety, where one can live out their days in peace growing crops and raising cattle, perhaps even starting a family of your own. In action platform games, farm levels are the basic introduction levels, explaining how some of the core game mechanics work for new players. These locations also provide small, easy to work out puzzles, as well as an introduction to collectible hunting. Enemies in these areas are often farmers, henchmen, angry chickens, possess farming equipment, or docile cows. In action-adventure games, farms are usually the center for trading quests or fetch quests. In some instances, special beverages or food items can only be bought here. Racing games tend to favor farms as good tracks, with minimal amount of turns or obstacles, with the only problems being livestock on the track or fenced-off areas. Horror games tend to focus on farms as abandoned households, evil entities, or infected roaming the cornfields, with the barn itself being the only safe space for restocking on supplies or escape.
Office. Most people play games to escape from mundane everyday situations, so if one happens to take them to the workplace, it's pretty much guaranteed that something's going to happen to spice things up. In action-adventure and first-person shooters, these levels take the form of a player having to fend off attackers on the premises, or fighting hordes of infected. Offices can serve as makeshift headquarters in apocalyptic situations, with players scavenging for leftover supplies amongst the scattered paperwork. In horror games, offices are usually abandoned, with equipment still on, the occasional phone ringing, and the printer printing a message. These types of scenarios create a sense of dread, as the player wanders the complex searching for answers on the disappearances of the other workers. In simulated and VR games, a common variant is starting in these office environments, letting the player catch a glimpse at the everyday life of the protagonist. Hell. While universally a location where condemned souls are left to suffer for all eternity, exactly what the player is in for when they pay a visit to Lucifer's domain is never entirely clear. Action platformers depict these levels teeming with lava, fire pits, chains, and metal cages. First-person shooters depict hell with corridors caked in blood and viscera, lit candles, mountains of skulls, and crumbling temples built by the souls of the damned. Hell levels are visually the most impressive set pieces in most games, featuring demonic-looking landscapes, interesting puzzles, and foreboding monster designs. Enemies in these levels are lumbering demons, fire imps, tortured souls, the undead, and mischievous devils. Surprisingly enough, the local residents' attitude toward visitors is not always as hostile as one might think. Some remorseful or mischievous entities might just be willing to help them escape their grisly fate. Whatever the case, the player will probably be in for a brutal fight if they ever end up here. Arcade. This is the kind of level that should make any gamer's inner child squeal with joy. Often utilized in action-adventure and sandbox games, these deceptively small dwellings house a plethora of arcade machines and a prize counter. Expect tons of 32-bit tunes blaring from every corner, as well as the odd hidden collectible or reward for earning a high score. Rowdy 80s kids trying to steal your tokens are your most likely opposition, but other enemies include rip-off Chuck E. Cheese mascots or even the arcade machines themselves. Arcade levels are used in games to break up the monotony of the main quest, and a nice diversion for the player for a change in scenery and possibly relive the older days. In some cases though, the machines won't be functional and are just props, but they may spit out tokens or coins if destroyed. When a game does include a playable arcade machine, expect a special achievement for slogging through the entire game, or using the time to have fun before moving on to the next level.
Gardens are unique in that it's a natural space usually attached to a property, but is managed and tended to by owners. A place for flowers, plants, and insect life to grow and flourish under the watchful eye of its master. Though a garden can become a place of nightmares depending on the owner. Common sites include a variety of flower beds, small buildings like huts and sheds, and formations of hedges which can include mazes. In action platformers, garden levels will be huge landscapes of dense weeds, full of large insects and towering flowers. This set piece is where players are shrunk down, avoiding giant bugs and spiders. Sometimes a play area or sandbox is used to venture to other areas of the map, or entering through the neighbor's fence into another garden. To the owner, a garden is a personal space we grow ourselves how we wish to suit our whims. To an intruder, it can be a dangerous space fiercely defended by its master. Trespassers should tread with caution. In racing games, certain tracks will feature the same theme as action platformers, where they are shrunk down to bite-sized machines. Hazards would take the form of children's toys, pet animals, birds, bugs, and lawnmowers. Aztec Mayan Temple. Majestic structures crafted in stone using primitive yet incredible techniques and technology, such temples are often locations that were used for reverence, worship, and even as tombs or treasure troves for the powerful and influential. However, in current times, these places are run down and covered in cobwebs and dust from centuries of neglect. In action platformers and action-adventure games, intrepid explorers and plunderers will often dive into such structures to seek out relics and treasures, be it for personal gain or to uncover historical discoveries. However, such temples are not without methods to drive away looters. Traps such as spikes, pitfalls, darts, and large boulders will keep out all but the most agile and cunning of raiders. Many puzzles will block their path that only the most elusive intellect can crack without becoming entombed themselves. Expect enemies to consist of native tribes, mischievous monkeys, deadly spiders, and poisonous snakes. In racing games, there's plenty of opportunity for weaving through the desolate temples, avoiding traps, and making sure not to fall into bottomless pits.
Inside Living Organism. These levels would feature the player crawling through fleshy tube-like pathways of intestines, blood vessels, and even nerve pathways of some giant organism. In both action platformers and action-adventure games, expect a plethora of enemies and hazards, such as moving flesh walls, acid pools, parasites, bacteria organisms, and even the villain's henchmen. Players may spot some organs along the way, some familiar to humans like a heart or brain, while others more alien in nature, each with their own function for the creature they inhabit. Being a friend or foe to the creature can dictate the player's actions. Do they aim to aid the creature they inhabit, or is their plan to see its demise via destruction from within? One thing is for sure, this is going to be quite the inside story if they manage to escape.
Hotel. In action-adventure games, a luxury hotel or basic motel are places to return to after a hard day's adventuring to rest and recover. Perhaps as a one-time passing through or a regular rest stop, a hotel provides many opportunities to meet people, eat, and drink or recover, while perhaps making new friends along the way. Perhaps there's a mystery to be solved if a player digs deep into the hotel itself. Maybe treasures to be found, or mysteries to solve. In some action-adventure games, the hotel is a prime location for assassination of key targets without alerting other patrons. Depending on the hotel, certain facilities may be present, such as a bar, swimming pool, stage, ballroom, games room, as well as the usual selection of guest rooms with a variety of luxury suites. Action platformer games usually feature hotels as a central hub, with NPC fetch quests or collectible hunting. They may offer mini-games or perks to level up the player's stats. Horror games feature hotels as abandoned complexes, with paranormal, monstrous entities, or the infected lurking nearby.
Museum. Found in action-adventure games or first-person shooter games, the player's main goal is to steal some sort of valuable item. It can vary from stealthy approaches to standard guns-blazing robbery. The player can encounter various enemies, such as security guards, police, SWAT teams, or cursed artifacts like a mummy or even a T-Rex skeleton. There are some cases though where the player is just a civilian caught in the action, where they'll have to try and escape the chaos unfolding around them. A neat thing about these museums is that some developers might slip in some Easter eggs to other games as exhibits, or even use concept art as one of the paintings in the vast hallways. Museum levels can also serve as a break from the action of the main storyline, and usually hold vast knowledge of history that may serve to advance the main story or provide real background information on certain exhibits. Expect the usual themes of a museum to cover medieval, major historical events, prehistoric, and space discovery, each with their own styles and interactive elements.
Apocalyptic. When the world has been devastated by war, catastrophe, or an exodus, the apocalyptic landscape is one categorized with broken and scrapped cars, buildings, and devastated infrastructure which may be in the process of being reclaimed by nature. Humanity is much more scattered and society is no longer what it used to be. Survival is often dictated by who's stronger, who has the remaining resources, and who's capable enough to claim them. In action-adventure games, it's often a desolate landscape filled with scavengers, raiders, and what remains of civilization in camps and shantytowns trying to rebuild humanity. Raid encampments and bandits fighting over the remains in scrap fields and looting the buildings that are still standing. In some apocalyptic levels, the storyline highlights that the player ventures into the future to witness this terrible tragedy to their world. In rare instances, racing games feature an apocalyptic setting, with many hazards featuring unstable buildings, devastating storms, and falling debris.
Virtual reality, cyberspace. The world within cyberspace, while one of fantasy, is also one found in the real computers and internet spaces. Often taking the form of programs and data, these levels will feature a neon color scheme with black backdrops, simulating the circuit pathways on circuit boards. Other styles include coded text in the form of the Matrix, highlighting a possible 3D hologram or image. The threat of viruses and hostile programs is ever present to corrupt cyberspace and push out intruders and hackers seeking to cause harm. Action-adventure games have the protagonist enter a virtual world, where they would need to break out or complete a challenge to impress the game master. These levels will feature some nod to the Tron universe in the form of bikes or character gear. In some cases, a weapon, skin, or vehicle would then be able to be used in the main game. Don't be surprised if the game devs throw clever fake glitches or fourth wall quotes along the way.
Prehistoric. Taking a trip into the land that time forgot brings all manner of dangers and excitement far removed from anything encountered in a more 21st century setting. The main risk will come from the wildlife, which of course mainly consists of long extinct beasts. Dinosaurs are easily the most common fare, but depending on exactly when in prehistory the level is set, other creatures like mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and gigantic long extinct sea life like the megalodon or mosasaurus can also pose a threat. Any resources available will likely be very basic or rudimentary, forcing the player to rely on old-school survival tactics if they want to stay alive. As for the human threats, expect tribes of cavemen wielding makeshift tools such as bone clubs and spears. It's not uncommon in action platformers to have a friendly caveman that will help the hero in some way or provide a unique item. There's often a blend of several dangerous environmental hazards in the mix as well, from erupting volcanoes, poisonous swamps, earthquakes, to even meteor showers, so players better keep their wits about them. Sometimes, the local wildlife can actually be of benefit, as it may actually be possible to tame and befriend an ancient beast or two.
Egyptian. This regular go-to location is set entirely in or around Egyptian culture. Action platformers focus more on difficult jumping puzzles, exploration of the pyramids, and a search for hidden artifacts. The kind of hostiles you can expect range from the supernatural, like reanimated mummies, to more natural obstacles such as deadly snakes, sandstorms, or quicksand. Action-adventure games focus on the exploration of the pyramids and tombs. These are usually littered with hidden traps and valuable treasure. Enemies in these locations are either alien in origin, reanimated corpses, hired mercenaries, or bandits. Racing games feature tracks around giant pyramids, sphinxes, and stone structures. Hazards tend to be quicksand, dust tornadoes, and cacti.
Library. In fantasy RPGs, a player can expect a repository of knowledge on all manner of subjects, with the more forbidden aspects often guarded by overcommitted librarians or any manner of supernatural entities. These locales, however, aren't just known for being typical enemy encounter spots, but the meeting point of various characters and plots where research takes precedence to advance the story. As such, it can also serve as a treasure trove of lore and backstory on the characters and setting of the game. Some of the text might also cover certain skills and abilities the character can learn, allowing the player to gain an edge over their adversaries. In horror games, libraries tend to be abandoned labyrinths of cobwebbed shelves filled with dusty books and a creepy ambience. The fear factor can ramp up considerably, as every corridor will look the same in this maze of a level.
Wild West. In action platformers, the most popular landmark is most likely a rickety old shanty town in the middle of nowhere, with a group of villagers just barely making ends meet with crime rife throughout. The local saloon offers a selection of drinks and a few fetch quests. In action-adventure and sandbox games, it won't be uncommon for players to get themselves into gunfights in the middle of town when the clock strikes noon. The sheriff's office may even hold opportunities for potential bounties. Expect enemies to consist of bounty hunters, wild stampedes of buffalo, local bandits, vultures, rattlesnakes, and coyotes. Through exploration, a player can find a local gold mine where valuable minerals and ore can be extracted. Technology will be rudimentary to non-existent, so the only option would be horses, carriages, or the local steam train to get to destinations faster. Expect old school weapons, such as trusty six-shooters, double-barreled shotguns, Gatling guns, rifles, and dynamite sticks.
Swamp. Whilst the streaks of sunlight streaming through the canopy of trees towering all around might be pleasant, but most other things about trekking through the swamp are most definitely not. Action platformers have swamp levels thick with mud and stagnant water that seriously impede the progress of players who wade through it. Expect carnivorous plants, venomous snakes, poisonous toads, crocodiles, and giant bugs, just to name some possibilities. Mist and fog can also obscure the player's vision, depending on the time of day, making reacting promptly to such threats that much more difficult. In action-adventure games, some NPCs in the swamps tend to be friendly witches who brew special potions once the player finds their ingredients. Monsters, evil hags, and the undead tend to call such places home as well, so players had better be prepared.
Construction site. Construction sites are often the hollowed out shells of buildings, skyscrapers, or renovations, which weirdly enough makes for some of the most iconic levels in video games. A staple of action platformers, players would have to balance their way across precarious pipelines and beams hundreds of meters above the ground. Enemy types often wield tools such as hammers, saws, and drills that can cause quite a bit of disruption to exploration. Other hazards may include wet cement, bulldozers, cranes, and heavy machinery. In action-adventure and first-person shooter games, the construction site is an innovative place to hold a battle, with the environment being maze-like in nature. Scaffolding makes for good vantage points, while a destructible plaster wall allows players to either get the drop on an enemy or make a quick escape. In horror games, construction sites are usually the result of paranormal disturbances, where workers have either fled or discovered something truly unsettling. These areas are almost always abandoned and provide a creepy, unshakable feeling.
Sky, clouds. There's all sorts of adventure waiting to be had above the clouds. In action-adventure games, cloud levels would feature exhilarating aerial dogfights against enemy aircraft. In action platformers, clouds can also inexplicably function as convenient stepping stones in the sky, letting the player parkour their way across the level towards the finish line. If they have an ability that allows their character to fly unaided at their disposal, there might be new, unexplored realms waiting for them up here, such as floating cities or islands suspended hundreds of feet above the ground. Enemies will typically be common baddies encountered elsewhere in the game, augmented with flight capabilities such as wings or jetpacks. Air beasts such as dragons, abnormally large birds, or giant insects will serve as airborne nuisances as well. Of course, the biggest worry will be trying not to lose footing and falling down below.
Plane. Often a smaller stage, but nonetheless harrowing when the plane is mid-flight, since one wrong step can mean a one-way ticket back down to Earth. Whether a player is hijacking the plane or saving it from such a fate, expect to be caught in narrow passageways and avoid falling out any loose doors or open windows. Should they be unfortunate enough to be on the outside, they may find themselves gripping on for dear life to avoid being thrown off their precarious perch. In action-adventure games, expect to face a deadly situation when entering a plane. There's always action to be found, even if you don't expect it. In rare instances, horror games feature the plane abandoned but still in flight, with the protagonist hallucinating or having nightmarish visions of a previous incident.
Island and beaches. Small pitches of sand out to sea, decorated by palm trees and the odd beachside villa or two, the perfect place for some R&R. Action platforming and action adventure games feature these levels as a more carefree, easy level to the game. It may hold more secrets than previously expected, forcing players to come back here later after finding a unique move or weapon. Wildlife can take the form of giant crabs, seagulls, or fish. In the more comedic settings, seeing the player contend with falling coconuts that leave them nursing a health-sapping headache. Coral reefs may hide buried treasure or a rare item, but in some cases, the player might also have a boat to let them traverse to other similar islands nearby. Who knows what secrets these sandy settings have in store? In racing games, beach levels are very common, spanning several karting titles. While in VR games, beaches tend to be iconic resting places to relax and explore with friends.
Police station. The sorts of activities a player can expect to get up to here usually depends on what side of the law they choose to walk on. In simulated games, the station happens to be their workplace. Chances are it'll serve as a central hub and safe haven throughout the game, where the player can strategize and review evidence to help locate and apprehend bad guys. In action-adventure games, the player may find themselves arrested. This would usually mean breaking out of confinement or an interrogation room. They would either sneak around the patrolling police and escape, or face them head-on with any firepower they manage to obtain along the way. Maybe they'll look to secure some evidence, or perhaps break out a suspect before justice can be served. In horror games, police stations are usually overrun with infected. The player will need to fight their way through the complex and find survivors or escape with a vehicle. Be warned, though. With a multitude of alarms and security cameras scattered all around the building, any windows of opportunity likely won't last long.
Nightclub. Usually found in action-adventure and first-person shooter games, these levels are jam-packed with colorful lighting and heavily copyrighted music blaring throughout loudspeakers. Most enemies encountered take the form of shady club members, bouncers, drunk partygoers, or an evil DJ. With how chaotic these levels tend to be, there's plenty of room to hide in the crowd or take cover behind the bar. With drinks flowing and music blaring, the player can expect high-octane action at all hours. The overwhelming noise will probably drown out any combat a player can get into. In sandbox games, nightclub levels can be a meeting place between two undercover agents looking to take down the kingpin of the club, or sometimes serving as a meeting spot to foster friendships and establish connections. The dance floor may even present the player with a face-off minigame where they would need to press the right inputs in time with the music beats. In racing games, some tracks will heavily feature music blaring in time with the race, creating an exhilarating experience.
Oriental. Under a pale gold sunrise, the mountains of the Orient call out to all quest seekers. Oriental levels are usually present in action platformers, which serve as a theme to the different styles and environments to the others on this list. Such as to be expected from a level like this that combines all forms of Asian culture such as Chinese dragons, red lanterns, Japanese torii gateways, Zen gardens, shrine temples, and gongs from the Far East. action platformers usually feature some form of the Great Wall in their adventure, as well as a fight within a dojo. Weapons in this level would be the standard katanas, kunai, throwing daggers, nunchucks, throwing stars, and bow staffs. Enemies in this level would usually feature ninjas, samurais, martial arts experts, dragons, demons, and supernatural entities. Some of these enemies would be extremely difficult and annoying to fight, since their movement pattern may be fast and unpredictable. Racing games tend to feature some form of racetrack around various pagodas and statues with kanji text written on flags or banners. While quite rare, horror games use these levels to explore abandoned settlements where the inhabitants have mutated or fled. These levels tend to feature some type of mythological demon from an Asian culture that has been released from its slumber.
Casino. Action platforming games will usually feature some sort of area where the player can place bets and gamble their in-game currency for rare items. On some occasions, these levels offer a variety of mini-games, with the winner earning a substantial profit. This makes it pretty easy to lose track of time as they attempt to snag the jackpot. In addition to the standard fare, like slot machines, roulette wheels, blackjack, and poker, they can occasionally find unexpected additions in the mix, like in-universe pastimes that will test player skill and strategy in addition to luck. Action-adventure games feature shootouts in the complex, with the player looking to hunt down a kingpin or cause as much damage to the infrastructure as possible. Racing games tend to feature brightly lit tracks littered with stacks of chips, coins, and dice spinning around the backdrop, creating a truly masterful set piece. Some games will even throw the player into a venue where all the games are larger than life, and the true gamble is on whether they're dealt the fortunate hand.
Everybody's a winner.
Airport. There's something about these places that stirs a sense of adventure and excitement within, most likely the anticipation of jetting off to explore new lands far away. A good airport level, likewise, never fails to bring these feelings to the surface, but with none of the tediousness of waiting around in the departure lounge or browsing the duty-free. Featured often in first-person shooters or action-adventure games, these aviation areas will always serve to lift players' levels of enjoyment. Racing games would feature a track built in and around the complex with hazards such as low-flying planes, conveyor belts, and sharp twists and turns. More often than not, the player will find themselves on the runway itself, most likely in an attempt to stop the bad guys from making an airborne getaway. If they're really lucky, they might even find a private jet waiting in a hangar to escape from the chaos below.
Mall. Stocked to the brim with all the supplies one might want to deal with any situation, the mall is the perfect place to splash the cash and treat the player to all the finer things in life. In action-adventure and sandbox games, malls tend to all the essentials a player could probably expect, like food, ammo, potions, and medical supplies. Depending on the setting, they may find some more unique items on sale as well. A clothing store may have some cool new outfits, a munition shop may provide some new firearms with upgrades, and a decoration store may provide some new furniture to decorate their in-game home. If it's not that, then the player is stationed at the mall to eliminate a target discreetly or to fight off hordes of infected. In horror games, the mall is usually devoid of anyone. Players would be extra cautious in the darkness, especially wandering around clothing shops with mannequins.
Park. In sandbox games, the park can mostly be found in the middle of the open world, a natural haven inside a concrete metropolis, an area for the player to relax and take a break from all the action, with nary an enemy or boss fight in sight, taking the form of finding a lost item, rescuing a cat from a tree, or partaking in an RC race. In visual novels, park levels are the ideal place to take a load off on a bench and spend time with friends and loved ones alike. In survival games, the park transforms into a foreboding place and is often cited as a location to avoid, populated by wild dogs, wolves, or humanoid opponents and monsters. Racing games feature a few parks, with the main hazards being trees, fences, fountains, and the occasional lake. Regardless of the genre, there's no shortage of fun to be had in exploring every nook and cranny. And who knows, maybe there'll be a hidden Easter egg along the way.
Factory, where raw materials are transformed into goods to be shipped out all over the world. The factory or industrial levels will often be populated by large machinery, raw material, shipping crates, and collections of offices and staff areas. In action platformers and racing games, factory levels have been known to be the toughest and most challenging locations. They feature heavy machinery, pits, conveyor belts, elevators, toxic wastes, explosive barrels, sentry guns, security cameras, leaky steam pipes, and giant alternating pistons. Enemies would consist of crazed workers, mechanical goons, drones, and inanimate scrap parts. In action-adventure games, an active factory is the hustle and bustle of activity and a prime location for finding jobs, goods, and funds. Expect active factory stages to be full of workers, possibly friendly or hostile, robots, and guards. However, an abandoned factory makes for quite a scary scene, as well as a viable place to secure salvage to repurpose for our own needs to survive another day. Horror games put an emphasis on factories being empty and possibly haunted by those lost in the production process. It also pays to be cautious around the heavy machinery, as they were built for processing materials and can be hazardous to one's health if not handled with care.
Boat, ship. Chances are that a voyage across the seven seas isn't as calm or relaxing as one hoped it would be. Without the stability of land, boats and ships will likely sway back and forth amidst a stormy hurricane, with tidal waves knocking the player about as they navigate from the bow to the stern. Players would probably find that the crew isn't keeping the safety standards, meaning any number of dangerous obstacles and equipment are rocking the boat, waiting to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Action platformers and action-adventure games focus on the exploration of the entire ship, while racing games take place in and around the vessel. Horror games tend to explore the boat as abandoned, rust buckets creaking on the water's edge. They're usually shown to have the entity or killer still on board. Regardless, it's almost guaranteed that the biggest foe will eventually be the deep blue itself, as a leak turns into a torrent, chasing them down.
Graveyard. Guaranteed to set a player's nerves on edge, graveyard levels are common in action platformers. These final resting places of the departed easily rank amongst the most eerie environments a gamer can be put through. Not only is walking through a site where the dead are buried unsettling, but the chances are it's set at night, with a full moon, a wolf howling, and a hefty dose of fog. This dials the already ominous feeling up to 11. Enemies usually revolve around zombies, ghosts, skeletons, and the occasional bat. Action-adventure games feature these levels as shootouts between rival gangs or factions. In fantasy games, the graveyard serves as a place for powerful items and artifacts hidden underground that the player will need to find. These mini-dungeons would be home to powerful enemies intent on stopping weary travelers. A mainstay of the horror or supernatural genres, a player will need to keep their wits about them as they make their way through these burial grounds.
Apartments. Generally a large building with clustered living conditions. This setting can be anything from a place to rest or perhaps a place to explore for supplies. Each apartment will be quite standardized and confined to 1 to 2 rooms purely for basic living rather than an elaborate house. Large stairwells and sometimes even elevators can be found in the larger apartment blocks, serving as transit or in some cases hazards to watch for. In action-adventure games and sandbox games, apartment levels act as a save location. It's usually the place for the character to change their appearance, restock on ammo, and even watch TV. In horror games, apartments can be a place of safety from the darkness, or our own personal prison, where we're plagued by the horrors stalking us in the dark corners. These games feature a more twisted, foreboding atmosphere, where long dark hallways cause the mind to believe something is lurking there, but there isn't anything at all. Maybe the neighbors will be friends and offer support, or maybe they're a threat to us and to be watched and avoided. Sometimes the greatest horrors in the world are far closer to home than we would like. Restaurant. From a humble fast food establishment to a 5-star gourmet location, restaurants are places designed specifically to satisfy the need to feed. Differing from bars in that the focus is exclusively on serving food to patrons rather than serving primarily drinks. Such establishments can often be locations to recover health and satisfy the stomach before heading off on the next adventure. Complete with kitchens, play areas, and rest areas to eat in comfort, sometimes with the addition of a bar for an extra boost at the end of a long day. You may find opportunities to meet new and old friends alike, and exchange stories over a hearty meal. Action platformers feature these levels where the character is shrunk, navigating between chairs and tables while avoiding falling food or other condiments. Action-adventure games have rare moments where conflict can occur, but more often than not, they serve as a backdrop of a shootout or a punch-up from disgruntled customers. Simulated games are the backdrop for these types of levels. Often the player would be in the kitchens or behind the counter serving orders to hungry patrons. Horror games feature these levels as abandoned, with certain play areas being the focus of some sinister entity lurking within. The backstory to some of these levels usually result in the food not being of animal, but of human quantity instead.
Bar. Almost as old as civilization, bars have existed across all manner of cultures, gathering humans together from the humble ramshackle village to the sprawling urban metropolis. In action-adventure games and MMORPGs, bars tend to be the center for interesting gossip from the patrons. This usually leads the player on the quest for an important item or monetary reward. Perhaps they'll meet a new companion to help the party on their epic journey, or maybe it'll act as a simple landmark to relax at and get their bearings while planning their next move over a hearty drink. Some establishments may do away with the whole relaxation part altogether, with bare-knuckle brawls and shots of gunfire instead of vodka, also fairly common occurrences. As such, it's probably best not to let oneself feel too at ease.
Amusement Park. Not exactly the highest form of entertainment, but you'll find no shortage of excitement at the local amusement park. Flashing lights, carnival music in the air, games aplenty, and with lots of prizes to be won. Don't be shocked if you manage to come across one or two surprises amongst the stalls. In action platformers, the amusement park will be a hub for minigames and collectibles. Some parts may even get the player to jump between carriages of a Ferris wheel or avoid being hit by a roller coaster. Collectibles will be scattered all across the level in tight or hidden spaces, making it rather difficult to hunt them all down. In some games, the amusement park itself is deemed incredibly unsafe to the public, with poorly designed attractions, unsanitary environments, grumpy staff, and unhygienic consumables. On the odd occasion, navigating through the fair's maze-like layout, a player may discover a circus attached to the grounds, with the big top often reserved only for the biggest of boss fights. In action-adventure games, the player may be given the option to ride the amusements. These could include a ghost train, roller coaster, Ferris wheel, log flume, or monorail. Small stalls may entice the player to try their luck and win a minigame, where the reward can be an achievement trophy, high score, or rare item. Sometimes the player is told to eliminate a key target amongst the crowd and not be caught in the act. In horror games, the fairground is usually abandoned, or twisted with the amusements and machinery serving as disorienting window dressing. This builds a creepy vibe alluding to terrible events occurring in a place designed to entertain. Certain attractions that may have been scary when it was full of visitors are now even more terrifying with the likes of the Haunted House and Hall of Mirrors.
Alien planets and alien moons. Outside of our own Mother Earth exist many more celestial bodies in the universe, many of which carry all manner of weird and wonderful landscapes and life forms, be it harmless or harmful. In gaming, this can tantalize the imagination as to what form these planets will take. If it can exist in reality, then it might be found out on an alien world. In action-adventure and action platformers, alien planets can contain a number of different game mechanics such as cosmic storms or toxic atmospheres. Expect the landscape to feature strange flora, with some of them being deadly. These locations are usually very eye-catching and beautiful, far exceeding that of Earth's. Enemies would usually consist of extraterrestrial beings, UFOs, and even evil bounty hunters or space pirates. The player usually finds themselves here after their ship has crash-landed or they were captured by aliens and forced into interrogation. Moon levels depicted in action platformers, action-adventure games, usually feature expanses of gray monotone with low gravity and no air. These locations will be filled with aliens, evil astronauts, and sometimes even robots. In racing games, tracks would be featured on the moon, with large craters, a moon base, and in some instances, a secret death laser. Expect some anti-gravitational barriers and lots of jumps.
Village. Found in fantasy games, action platformers, and action-adventure games, the village acts as the starting point of an adventure, or as the hub point along the way. Here, side quests are littered in every direction with townsfolk in need of assistance, such as fetch quests, bounties, and training of all kinds. Due to its status as a refuge, the village level usually comes equipped with its own unique soothing ambience compared to other, more dangerous areas in the game. If players were to crave excitement, they'll probably encounter some very terrifying enemies around the perimeter, from crazed villagers to werewolves, vampires, or trolls. In some games, expect the village to be overrun when infected, or destroyed later on into the game, leaving behind a dead settlement. In most cases, the village acts as an area for the player to upgrade their weapons, restock on items, acquire allies, and buy clothes and armor. In racing games, villages are used as set pieces or landmarks, with the tracks being constructed around and through the settlements.
Prison. Found in action-adventure games or survival horror games, the protagonist has been falsely charged for a crime they probably didn't commit and now have to serve time. In most cases, their main goal is to escape from their temporary confinement. Expect dark, dreary, damp environments in these locations. Every area of this level is filled with untrustworthy inmates and crazed lunatics. The police are not friends here, and every item or weapon a player may have had previously would have been confiscated. A prisoner NPC might try to help the player out, but they may end up sabotaging them in the end. It's not uncommon to encounter various prisoners who are trying to start riots, attacking the player with shanks or anything they can get their hands on. Most prison levels feature the player sneaking around trying not to get caught by the guards, possibly obtaining keys or items for either themselves or other prisoners. What makes these levels so difficult, however, is the fact that the player will have to improvise equipment to get around and escape. Whether you're escaping in a stealthy, quiet manner or loud and bombastic, these levels will always tend to be chaotic to the player. In the end though, once the level is complete, expect a huge jailbreak.
Mountain. A staple of many action platformers, mountains present a massive challenge. Crumbling ledges, terrifying drops, and tumbling boulders are commonplace, while dangerous wildlife of various breeds are also encountered here. With this style of level often overlapping with others mentioned elsewhere on this list, like lava or ice, additional environmental perils are also on the table, possibly even alternating between them as the player ascends higher and higher. In racing games, these levels are very common. Drifting would either be the key to winning or falling off the track. At the end of the day, there may be something important waiting for you at the summit, or perhaps they're just eager to view the level from the highest peak.
Asylum. A staple of most horror games. Players will find dimly lit corridors, abandoned cells, and the occasional bang or ghostly wail. With the wheelchairs scattered around the filthy rooms, coupled with the abandoned medical equipment, the complex looks more suited to torture than treatment. All of this would already be enough to create a sense of unease, but chances are things will only get worse with the realization that they're probably not the only one roaming the halls. Horrifically mutated monsters and escaped patients left behind after whatever catastrophe led to the building's abandonment are par for the course, revealing that the ones who should have been helping those in need were far more preoccupied with exploiting them instead.
Haunted house. Usually a dark, ominous, crooked house, perched on the outskirts of a forest, abandoned and haunted at the dead of night. Being a staple of action platformers, haunted house levels are ranked as one of the most iconic and enjoyable set pieces in a game. ghosts likely aren't the only tricks and traps these levels have in store. In addition to the expected evil spirits, haunted houses also come with a variety of other puzzles and threats to keep the player guessing. Such examples include randomly switching around the architecture in nonsensical ways with little to no warning, or unforeseen forces tossing furniture about, and even dark magical powers looking to corrupt the weak-willed into madness. Expect hordes of ghosts, bats, giant spiders, and weird monsters in this house party. In first-person shooter games, disembodied voices, candlelit corridors, and dark sinister-looking hallways create a truly atmospheric experience. Ramping up the scare factor as players wonder just what these forsaken properties have in store next. In racing games, the track would usually feature raceways around dusty carpets, long twisted corridors with dangerous pits, and spider-infested basements. There will be all manner of hazards including floating furniture, vampire bats, trapdoors, and spooky monsters.
Jungle. Dense foliage, dark shadows, hanging vines, tropical birds, and the occasional waterfall. In action platformers and action adventure games, the player will encounter tons of wild animals here, like hippos, tigers, lions, or even gorillas, all of which hate their territory being trespassed on. Of course, expect venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, and carnivorous plants as well. In some cases, the player might also encounter a tribe of wild savages untouched by modern society. Expect hidden pits or booby traps blending into the wilderness, making each trek a deadly adventure. As with most jungle levels, it's not uncommon for the player to find themselves using an animal as a trusty steed to venture the area. In racing games, jungle levels themselves usually focus on many different pathways and shortcuts, and sometimes the local wildlife pose a threat to the race.
Hospital. In simulated games, hospitals serve as the core set piece of the game, where players take on the role of dutiful doctors, doing all that they can to give their patients the best possible care available. In horror games, hospitals are depicted in a much darker direction by making them long abandoned horror shows where the player must look for answers to some disturbing mystery. Expect blood-stained walls with crumbling tiles, rusting decrepit medical equipment, and possibly even mutilated patients. In some rare instances, these dwellings are haunted with moving wheelchairs and ghostly apparitions. There's something about wandering the dark corridors of such places that prompts a feeling of dread like no other. As such, when there's no friendly faces wandering the halls, it's a sure sign that something has gone very badly wrong.
Desert. The featureless expanses of shifting sand are amongst the most awe-inspiring environments in gaming, stretching as far as the eye can see, emphasizing isolation from civilization. Action platformers tend to portray these levels brimming with vicious wildlife, hazardous cacti, and sand traps. The player would be required to have sustenance on standby to brave the scorching sands. Action-adventure games portray them as wastelands, with hazardous environments such as sandstorms and even the blistering heat from the sun. The enemies here would consist of hired mercenaries, vultures, and poisonous snakes. Racing games have tracks that usually feature Western or Egyptian-style aesthetics. pirate theme can often be categorized by the presence of wooden-based pirate ships, peg-leg sailors, skull and crossbone flags, a lighthouse, palm trees, cannons, buried treasure, and mugs of grog on tap at the local tavern. A pirate's life for a player is often the life of a rogue, stealing gold and riches from anyone and everyone, or evading the pirates to retain their riches and their life on the open seas. Action platformers usually focus on locales such as pirate ships docking on the water, or villages with smugglers and swashbucklers. The hazards in this level will feature cannons being fired from ships and shark-infested waters. Action-adventure games feature some tropical islands with plenty of pirates wielding cutlasses and flintlocks. Expect to climb the crow's nest of a pirate ship, or dive into the coral reefs for buried gold. In sandbox games, the player would be able to sail to different islands, battle enemy pirates, and find long-lost treasure. Some islands may be haunted with pirate skeletons and ghosts. Other islands may contain carnivorous plants and dangerous wildlife. Racing games use this level often, with pirate ships serving as hazards to racers on the track, or in some cases, party games feature this level as an aesthetic style backdrop.
Spaceship, Mothership. Vast intergalactic travel throughout the depths of space is made possible through the medium of spaceships, or the much larger style, Mothership. Towering structures of metal and alloy with a veritable circulatory system of wires and electronics to power and maintain the function of the craft as it thunders throughout space. Often sci-fi in nature, such a level will contain many styles of rooms from living quarters, training rooms, command rooms, research labs, shuttle bays, and cargo bays to cover just about any eventuality that can occur while traveling deep space. In first-person shooter games, these levels have the player aboard an alien vessel and try to find a way to destroy it from the inside. Horror games will feature an abandonment or partially destroyed craft, where the player would need to investigate the horrors that have occurred there. As with any high-tech space vessel, these levels tend to have heightened security fences, robots, human, and alien troopers that are deployed to keep out any unwanted interlopers. Keeping the ship in order is critical to survive in the vacuum of space, while also equally as difficult to escape from without succumbing to the cold, dead void beyond.
Train. When used to travel between locations, a player can expect speedy and comfortable travels to guide them to their next objective. The humble train will take them as far as the tracks will run, and as far as they can afford, assuming they're not trying to sneak a free ride. Expect enclosed spaces within the carriages, such as seating areas, catering, and storage. If they wish to hijack the train, then they'll need to seize the locomotive itself. First-person shooters usually result in a firefight on board the train. Expect sections to take place on the roof, while having to navigate dangerous hanging signs and tunnels. In some instances, the game may want the player to jump from one moving train to another in a daring feat. Sometimes the player is asked to derail the train to steal its valuables or stop a terrorist threat. Horror games feature the player moving down endless carriages with no one in sight. These levels are usually designed for hallucinatory moments of the protagonist.
Castle. Foreboding monuments standing solitary on the horizon, along a cliff edge or hidden amongst a dense wood, the video game Castle is often the site of a haunting evil experiment, or the scene of an ancient battle. In medieval times, it would be filled with knights of all shapes and sizes, the corridors torch-lit with well-stocked furniture and the spoils of war. In a fantasy setting, it may not be uncommon to find a dragon atop the tallest spire, but for the sake of staying in one piece, it's probably best not to hope. A futuristic exploration of a castle will see a blend of history melding with advanced technology. Action platformers portray castles as sinister dwellings surrounded by lava, while vampire bats descend from the rafters to serve their purpose as frightful nuisances. Horror games tend to focus on castles as being a home for supernatural entities such as ghosts and vampires. The player would explore dark catacombs, torture dungeons, and deadly traps. These locations would also serve as the final boss residing at the top of the castle.
Cathedral, church. A place of worship and contemplation. In action-adventure games or fantasy JRPGs, these levels are designed to ward off evil and serve as safe havens for the weary traveler. An ancient symbol of faith and salvation, these holy grounds will often act as neutral territory where nothing can harm the player. Sagely counsel may be found from the servants of God within. However, if those inside serve a darker power, or aren't as keen on practicing what they preach, things can quickly take a more sinister turn. Cultists, ghosts, and undead from the crypts below are often the biggest threats here. Additionally, these locations also serve as a common choice of battleground for a villain to make a bold last stand against a hero. Their struggle serving as a symbolic representation of the internal battle of good and evil, morals, and vices.
Ice, snow. Easily some of the most visually appealing levels the world of gaming has to offer, these frozen frontiers are guaranteed to have some cool scenery in store. From snow-capped peaks scraping the sky, to mighty lakes frozen solid by the sub-zero climate, to an entire wilderness of trees blanketed by a layer of snow. Action platformers depict these levels with icy pathways making traction difficult, snowstorms that hinder visibility, and frozen lakes that will need to be stepped on cautiously. Enemies usually consist of animated snowmen, yetis, penguins, polar bears, and white wolves. In action-adventure games, the intense cold may pose dangers to the player, so they would need to find suitable clothing to survive. That's not even counting any human adversaries they'll meet, since they'll likely be better equipped to tackle the harsh conditions than themselves. In racing games, the track could feature pathways over tundra and ice sheets. Hazards would include giant penguins, ice crystals, trees, and frozen lakes. The main annoyance again will be the lost of traction while traversing this winter wonderland.
Docks. Often the pillars of trade and industry. Docks are the home to vast collections of shipping containers ready for trade, warehouses to store them in, and infrastructure to maintain and support the fleet of the ships that make it all possible. In action platformers and action-adventure games, the intrepid explorer will find high cranes, vast harbors, smokestack chimneys, and polluted water. Expect all manner of large and small vessels, as well as an assortment of dock workers and sailors keeping everything in order. Whether they are friend or foe depends on the player's intent. Of course, the darker side of the docks can be the center of smuggling and illegal activity, where anyone can make a quick buck if they know the right people, as well as the right containers to liberate. These levels tend to be difficult by normal standards, and will require patience and precision. Racing games will feature these levels where the player will have to navigate through shipping containers, moving cranes, and docking ships. The setting for these levels is usually at sunset, where visibility of the track can prove troublesome. In horror games, these levels are usually set at night while it's raining. The player would have been ordered to investigate the area about strange sightings by the local populace.
Medieval. These levels are full of old castles, epic battles, knights in shining armor, trebuchets, battering rams, siege towers, villages, and taverns. It's a precarious era, fraught with violence and beating drums. Action platformers will usually feature this type of medieval flair, with players fighting alongside factions waiting to storm a castle. These locations are often extremely hazardous with spike traps, catapults, burning oil, and arrow barrages. Expect the enemies to consist of hordes of different types of knights, each wielding different weapons to show class, bandits, and vicious wildlife. With first-person shooter games, the player would either have time traveled back to this era and be equipped with modern weapons, or they would be a knight armed and ready to serve the king. In sandbox games, the player will have a huge landscape to explore with lots of different locations, such as caves, small villages, towns, tombs, mountains, swamps, forests, and ruins. Each area may offer a fetch quest by an NPC, or hold a valuable treasure chest containing a rare item. NPCs in medieval levels would often speak comically broken dialect to the old times, but are shown to be brave and loyal to the gods. They would usually reward the player with special elemental weapons or armor for their heroic deeds. Medieval levels themselves have the best atmosphere due to them being iconic and a memory of a lost time. With rich cultural heritage, the medieval levels in gaming is immediately recognizable to most players.
Research Lab. Research labs often serve as a place of science gone wrong in gaming media, such as virus production, human experiments, technological marvels, and even the popular Doomsday device. Run by the greatest minds trying to push the boundaries of knowledge and morality, such stages can be categorized by their sterile white environments, mysterious chemicals, and advanced scientific tools, and in some unfortunate cases, test subjects. Action platformers would feature these levels near the end of the game as a test of the player's finesse and patience. Expect Tesla coils, radioactive waste, robot drones, machinery, sentry turrets, and crazed scientists. Horror games love to feature this level as the core element of the story. Expect the location to be dark, desolate, and teeming with untold horrors. More often than not, keycards would be required to access certain rooms, and in some instances, expect to venture through vents to get to secret areas. This could be a place to gear up for the next mission, a place to improve oneself, to get stronger, or perhaps a place where the greatest scientific horrors can be found that need to be put down before they can unleash their fury on an unsuspecting world. Research labs are a place of great advancement, but will it also be a place where moral values are sacrificed too?
Space. The endless void of darkness. Often considered the final frontier where all manner of unknown oddities could be found. Alien motherships, planets, space stations, spaceships, stellar anomalies, and many other very real possibilities. While holding the endless possibilities like many other themes, space holds more promise for very real things rather than fantasy or dreamscapes. Space can serve as a backdrop for many other sci-fi themes and concepts, but often the planets themselves will serve as the primary focus of the majority of the experiences and challenges. In simulated games, expect spaceflight to be the core focus of these levels. Sandbox games that feature planetary travel will also have these as essential hub locations. Players would visit planets, board enemy ships, and make regular stops at space stations for fuel and resources. Space is a very dangerous place, for in the cold dead void, anyone or anything can be lurking out there.
Military war. A popular level setting in first-person shooters are rubble-strewn streets of a war-torn town or dangerous battle zones in the no man's land. Friendly NPCs offer advice and in some cases help upgrade weapons. Levels like these can take many forms, alternating as the storyline progresses depending on whether the player is thrown into the heart of combat or carving out a line of defense to prepare themselves before the enemy onslaught resumes. Action platformers and action-adventure games take place in war zones or military outposts. They're usually filled with snipers, searchlights, aerial drones, mines, troopers, scout jeeps, warhead explosives, and heavy-duty hardware such as Apache helicopters, tanks, jets, and minigun emplacements. This level would pose as one of the toughest to beat in the game due to its enemy variety and hazard emplacement. Usually, these levels are used when the protagonist has time traveled to this era to stop a key target, or to retrieve a hidden artifact or blueprint, or rescue someone imprisoned, or to simply destroy the base entirely.
Highway. These multi-lane monstrosities offer a lot more than just a way to get a player character to and from work. Featured almost exclusively in action-adventure and racing games, high-speed chases between law enforcement and criminals are a common sight. Which side a player is on depends on the context of the game. Illegal street races are another possibility, with big cash prizes on the table as they weave in and out of traffic at breakneck speed whilst ramming rivals off the road. Enemies in this level usually include henchmen chasing the player down in vehicles such as tanks, APCs, or jeeps. Large trucks pose as quick-time events or explosive getaways, while barriers and slow traffic would serve as serious hazards in this fast-paced level. In horror games, these settings appear as deadly obstacle courses full of overturned, burnt-out vehicles and hordes of ravenous undead that the player will need to navigate to get to their objective.
Sewer. Stretching on for miles below the surface, the dark tunnels and sounds of dripping water echoing off the slime-covered walls will do little to ease the nerves. Sewer levels are ranked as one of the most common and hated levels in video game history, because more often than not, it's just a maze of endless repeating textures and dimly lit tunnels. In action platformers, the ledges will be extra slippery with hazardous chemicals. In action-adventure games, it won't be rare to find several NPCs who offer fetch quests for a reward. Enemies in this level take the form of overgrown vermin such as rats, flies, or sewer alligators. In first-person shooters, sewer levels tend to be locations the player is unfortunately thrust into. Expect to wind up backtracking or otherwise getting lost fairly often. Sometimes the player will have to redirect the water flow by turning valves in order to progress through the level, or even swimming beneath the surface to find the exit.
stadium, arena. In racing and sports games, these set pieces act as prime locations. In action platformers, they serve as either a medieval onslaught, a fighting arena, or as an integral part of the storyline. Flashing lights, massive fields of space to play on, and thousands of spectators packing the stands to cheer the player on. Expect some fans to throw helpful items and weapons into the arena for the player to use, while commentators will often provide a real-time rundown of events unfolding as the game continues. Action-adventure games feature these levels for darker settings, such as drug deals that invariably go wrong or a stronghold to defend against waves of enemies. In horror games, stadiums are abandoned, destroyed, and desolate, providing a once happy, lively event, now a shell of its former glory. School. A place of education and learning and social interaction among peers. In gaming, school can serve as a place of growth as well as a setting for all number of adventures around classrooms, sports halls, subject rooms, and even the campus itself. Though not always a place of safety, sometimes schools carry a more sinister undertone when students or teachers become the threat itself. Suddenly, a school becomes quite unnerving and loses all of its comfort and security. Schools are the central hub location in visual novels and JRPGs, with the story revolving around each character and how they came to be at the school. Horror games feature the school set at night, closed off and full of Japanese demons. Often categorized by office-based desks, teaching rooms for all manner of academic subjects, teachers and authority figures, and a variety of characters to interact with as equals, be they friends or bullies alike. On the surface, it's a place for kids to gain an education, but below the surface, who knows what weird and wonderful adventures or horrors are going on for the intrepid explorer.
Volcano. In action platformer games, lava levels typically feature the player navigating platforms of molten rock, with fiery death waiting should they lose their footing. Other dangers to be wary of include red-hot debris raining down from above, or bursts of erupting lava that explode in front of them with little to no forewarning. Some creatures thrive in such extreme climates, such as rock monsters, giant bugs, lava beasts specifically evolved to cope with harsh temperatures, and fire monsters infused with the incendiary power of their home turf. Despite the heat, there's also the potential for some rather fascinating puzzles, usually involving redirecting the flow of lava in various ways to open up otherwise inaccessible areas. In action-adventure games, these levels may task the player to navigate while under strict time limit, be it a limited air supply or an impending eruption. In racing games, there are a few occasions where the racetrack takes place through a volcano, where dodging rocks and lava flows poses a challenging but exhilarating experience.
Forest, woods. Seen in action-adventure games, these levels serve as the very first area the player can explore after leaving town. In action platformers, these woodland areas frequently serve as the second level or early level, allowing beginners to get to grips with the mechanics. A typically serene experience, a forest level is used to ease the player into the larger world the game has to offer them. Once prepared for the bigger challenges, these areas can and will up the ante with more threatening foes. One such example is expanding its size to the point where finding a way out of these log-filled labyrinths presents a harder task than the first trek. Expect to fight monsters such as wolves, bears, spiders, and even bandits who ambush weary travelers. Environmental hazards usually take the form of fallen trees blocking the way, beehives, or abnormally large fruit falling off branches. NPCs wandering the wilderness are also fairly common, needing help to find their way out or giving the player a quest with the promise of a reward. In some instances, developers will add seasons to their level, which creates different hazards and new pathways through the environment. In racing games, tracks typically involve racing through muddy pathways and difficult hairpin turns. Seen mostly in rally games, the dense foliage and lack of lighting can provide a difficult course to win on. In horror games, forest levels are incredibly eerie and unsettling. They tend to be set at night with foreboding sounds. It's up to the player to venture through this terrifying location and find an exit before whatever entity or killer finds them.
Grass fields. Wide sprawling plains as far as the eye can see. A grassy field is often an early level or introduction area of a game where some of the more basic enemies and wildlife spawn. Action platformers tend to focus on these levels as tutorials for new players with simple objectives and an easy level layout. Alternatively, in action-adventure games, such an enormous setting can play host to a surprise ambush or enormous battle. NPCs in these areas are often anthropomorphic rabbits or wildlife who are very polite and teach the player the basics of how to play. Sometimes these NPCs will offer up a fetch quest, which entices the player to reach another NPC or item much further into the game. Enemies of these levels are evil henchmen, ravaging wildlife, anthropomorphic food, and the humble slime. Grassfields are almost always the most peaceful location in the game, and players long to be able to travel back to it, once they've encountered the horrors of the later levels.
Underwater. 70% of the ocean is still unexplored. It's not surprising then that so many games take the exhilarating feeling that comes with finding new discoveries below the waves and run with it for all they can. Actually, this is one of the oldest level types in the history of gaming, with action platformers being the first ones. In action-adventure and first-person shooters, players plunging the depths can take many forms, including a boat, a submarine, or maybe just good old-fashioned swimming. Whatever the case, a massive void of blue stretching out in all directions is quite a sight, ideally selling just how vast this new, uncharted realm can be. Uncovering sunken ruins, retrieving treasure, or hunting dangerous game are just some of the activities a player may expect. Enemies are typically dangerous forms of sea life, such as jellyfish, octopi, piranhas, electric eels, and of course, sharks. Evil henchmen wearing scuba equipment may also pose a threat, as well as enemy submarines, sea mines, and massive leviathans like krakens and sea serpents. Other than that, unless the player owns their own submarine, their biggest problem will likely be a limited supply of air, forcing them to search for pickups or air bubbles to top off or resurface every now and again. In rare cases, racing games feature an underwater track. Players race through glass tubes, marveling at the expansive scenery as they fight for first place.
Fantasy. Elves and goblins, castles and kingdoms, dungeons, and other things that one may find in a fantasy realm. Sometimes isolated to a single level as per the theme, the fantasy level is one of the most creative yet recognizable of the themes featured on this list. Action platforming games tend to feature a level of this variety, where the protagonist may have stumbled into a portal or a book. Various landscapes tend to feature a small isolated village, towering snow-capped mountains, medieval-style architecture, and many dangerous murky forests. These levels are the core staple in MMORPGs. Expect leagues of knights, demons, evil wildlife, dragons, orcs, evil wizards, and necromancy. Combined with an Arthurian mythological beast of every kind, a cavalcade of varying races, and a fair share of magic and witchcraft, it's a world where the imagination comes to life.
Urban. A staple of gritty, crime-based stories, street races, or zombie apocalypses, urban levels provide a familiar yet varied landscape for a player to explore. Bricked skyscrapers, graffiti, chain-link fences, and back alleys aplenty in these dark, dreary cities. Futuristic cities are depicted as clean, corporate, dozens of neon signs, and a massive security system. In action platformers, players will find themselves either exploring the city's streets or jumping from rooftop to rooftop. Hazards can involve anything from road barricades, subway trains, to heavy traffic. In action-adventure and sandbox games, most urban levels will be overrun by criminal activity, with police either stretched too thin to effectively help or too corrupt to care in the first place. Street brawls, gunfights, and high-speed chases can be found in mass, in addition to fearful crowds of NPCs just trying to get through the day in one piece. Enemies usually consist of gangs, corrupt police, street thugs, or the undead in more extreme situations. NPCs would be faction gangs, co-workers, or random civilians seeking favors. Collectibles in these environments tend to be an annoyance, and there are so many places a player can explore, not to mention the massive high-rises, alleyways, and rooftops providing confusing perspectives when the player views their map. Racing games especially make use of these levels, with tracks taking place through busy downtown intersections, parks, highways, and construction sites. These levels tend to be the most visually appealing in races, and amongst some of the toughest.
Cave. Subterranean labyrinths with potential danger lurking around every darkened corner. Exploring these areas is not for the faint of heart. It's probably a smart idea to load up on supplies before heading in, since it's all too easy for a player to lose their way and find themselves trapped in a sticky situation without an easy escape. Still, even with all necessary precautions taken, caves contain all manner of unexpected and often unpleasant surprises to catch wannabe spelunkers off guard. The biggest problem they'll face is visibility, or rather lack thereof. With any light source they do encounter or bring along only illuminates a small area ahead of them, leaving them with no idea what might be waiting just a few steps ahead. Other than that, monsters lurking in the shadows, bats, bears, as well as environmental hazards like pitfalls, falling rocks, or stalactites pose a serious problem too. As such, it's best to exercise caution when venturing through these areas, since one can never be sure what they'll throw next. In fantasy RPGs, it's best to have some traveling companions who can join in on the exploration. Having them tag along is a must. After all, one of the golden rules of caving is that one should never do it alone.
Did you enjoy the video? Why not click the bell icon and subscribe to see more content from us at TatsTopVideos. And now let's see the creators of this video.